In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down my retouching workflow and show you guys exactly how simple it is to take your images from looking like this to looking like this in some simple steps. So are you guys ready? All right, let's go to the computer. So to help me with my editing today, I'm also going to be using my Wacom Intuos tablet. This tablet is an absolute lifesaver. Once you get used to using something like this, trust me, you would not want to go back to using an actual mouse, but it actually makes you edit a lot faster and a lot more precise when you have to make finer adjustments on smaller detail areas. Invest in a Wacom Intuos tablet. If you haven't got one, I highly recommend investing in one. So if you are interested in checking out Wacom Intuos tablets, I'll put a link in the description below where you can check out this particular one, also some of the other models. So what we're going to be editing today is this image from a recent shoot I did with model Alyssa. This was a golden hour shoot, and if you haven't seen that video, I'll put the link here where you can go and see that behind the scenes from that shoot. So what we like to do first is start off by doing our base edits in Lightroom, and then we'll take our image into Photoshop. So starting off in Lightroom, I'm going to start from the top to bottom. I'm going to show you how simple this is. So once we've done a selection of our images and images that we are planning to edit, we'll start by doing a base edit on one image and then apply that base edit to all the other images that were taken under the same lighting setup and lighting scenario. That way we've got a lot of continuity throughout from start to finish, from shot to shot. So we're going to start first by adjusting our temperature. This image is actually quite good to start off with, but we're going to add a little bit of warmth back into it. Because it was a golden hour shoot, I want to exaggerate that golden tones in the shot a little bit more. So we add a little bit of warmth and a punch of tint, a punch of a sort of magenta. We'll go towards that magenta tint to give us that golden effect. So the next thing we're going to do is bring up our exposure just a tad bit, up to about 30. And then we're going to mess with our contrast a little bit, just to add a little bit of punch to the image, so about 10. And I'm going to bring the highlights down a little so recover some of that detail in the hair. So we want to recover some of that detail in the hair. So I'm going to go to about 30 just to recover some detail. What I love about the new Lightroom as well is that you can target specific areas within your image as well. So we will do a little bit of that, but that will be by image to image as well. So and depending on the lighting situation and the scenario. So next step we're going to do is open up our shadows a little, and you can already see how that is giving the image a little kick as well. So we open up our shadows and then we'll bring our whites down a little as well. And the next step is we're going to add a little bit of black, which will, compensate for bringing up our shadows that much. So if we look at the before and after, you can see how we've already brightened up the shot and brought in some life into the actual image. So now that we've got that done, we also use a cinesoft filter for this particular shoot. What that does is actually softens the skin in camera naturally. So you get natural softening to the image and the skin texture. So we're not going to play around too much with skin texture here, but we're going to drop our texture on our present sliders. I'm going to drop that down to about 10, and then we're also going to drop the clarity just to exaggerate that effect a little bit more. And that's it in our basic adjustment panel. We will come down and adjust our greens a little bit. We're going to knock some of that greens out and make it a little bit more golden. We want to make it a little bit more golden behind her. So we're going to knock some of that greens out. And you can see this is very, very subtle and very, very gentle. So you have to be like, you don't have to go crazy with these particular shots because a lot of the work was done in camera. So we just got to highlight and sort of bring back those areas that we saw with a natural eye. So that's what we're going to do for that. And then last but not least, see, I don't really play with any of these settings yet. But you can add a little bit of sharpening if you wanted, but I'll hold off on the sharpening and just give have the natural sharpening that the image had straight out of camera. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add some correction, some profile correction, and also remove any chromatic aberration that was caused by, you know, with the light coming from behind our subject, etc., and that was coming into the lens. So we're going to do that, and then obviously profile correction just to correct any distortion as well. So we will apply a crop to there, and then like I said, you can target specific areas. So I personally think that we can maybe drop the background a little bit in terms of exposure. So what we'll do is, with using the new tools in Lightroom, we'll select our background, and then we will just bring the exposure of our background down to about, let's say about 30. That gives our subject a little bit more of a pop on the background, which is amazing, as you can see. So this is what the image is looking like already, just with our basic adjustments in Lightroom. Now that we've done our basic adjustment in Lightroom, all we do is open that image in Photoshop. So now that our image is in Photoshop, what we want to do now is assess our image and look at what we want to remove and what we want to improve and what we want to add to our image. So I always start by duplicating my image. That way, if I make any mistake, I can always delete, but I still have my original image at the bottom. So we're going to start by pressing Command J. That will duplicate our image, and then we're going to zoom in and we're going to look at any imperfections within the skin or any distracting elements on the image that we want to remove, and that's where we're going to start with. So we're going to look at areas, say if I get a white brush and a blank layer, so you guys can see, and we get just a normal white brush, and I'm going to highlight all the areas that we like there, maybe there, we got a few strands of hair there and a few flyaway hairs there. So we're going to start by removing those areas first, and also this is a little bit distracting, so we're going to remove that as well, right? So if we delete that layer, and then going on our layer copy 1. So for removing blemishes and spots, I prefer using either the patch tool or the spot healing brush. You can also use the clone stamp tool. There's so many things that you can use within Photoshop to actually get you good and similar results, but those are the tools I prefer. But I've recently used the removal tool in Photoshop, and I find that it works really, really well. So we're going to start by using that and get rid of the flyaways and all the distracting elements. Good thing as well, as Alyssa has got really good skin, so there's not a lot of work we have to do in terms of skin and removing any skin imperfections. It's just minor things. So we're going to come in, and you also want to make sure that you zoom in and out your image and you're not just working in all the time. So we're just going to remove those little flyaways. So now that we've finished our skin cleanup, next thing we're going to do is run our frequency separation action. When it comes to portrait, I prefer to use frequency separation action, and when it comes to beauty, I will use the dodge and burn technique with frequency separation action that allows me to get amazing results without doing too much work. So we're going to run our frequency separation action. I'm going to run the 8-bit version of the action, and that's going to run through, and it's going to give us a chart where we can see how much blur to add to the actual image, how much Gaussian blur to add to the image. I usually keep it between 7 and 8.5 to 9. So I'm going to click OK. And once that action is run, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to come to my low layer, and then I'm also going to select the mixer brush tool. I prefer to use the mixer brush tool technique. Obviously, the good thing with frequency separation is that you do separate the low layer from the high layer, or basically what that entails is you separate the color layer from the texture layer. So you're working on each and every layer independently. So I like to use the mixer brush tool to blend out the areas or the inconsistency within the skin, from shadows to light, So that's what we're going to be doing now. I'm going to identify those areas and we're going to do a quick. So in terms of our mixed brush settings, my settings is a wetness of 14, load of 15, mix of 14, and a flow of 11. That is a perfect mix for me. It might be slightly different for you, but those are the settings that I use. So starting with a mixed brush tool, I want to go with a brush size roughly the same size of the area I'm trying to fix, as well as a hardness of 0. You want a soft edge brush. So, and I'm gonna slowly go from left to right. Like, as you can see, if I go and put that on and off, you see it is very, very subtle, and it's just smoothing out those transitions between the dark areas and the light areas. So you're looking for those areas where there's definitely there's a noticeable transition between the dark and the light areas. And like I said, you're not actually messing with the actual texture here. This is just the color part that you're smoothing out. So make sure you're zooming in and out as well. You don't want to be going too close, because if you're getting too close, you might end up doing too much. So if we turn it on and off, you'll see what we've actually done there. So we'll go in and get this all nice and tidied up. So for instance, take this massive patch here where there's a slight discrepancy between highlight and dark. So sometimes what I'll do is jump into my patch tool and basically drag from one area to the next using the patch tool, because that'll cover a much more bigger area a lot quicker, give us a better result fairly quickly. So I'm going to start. To do that, and if I turn those layers on and off now, you'll see that change that we've made, just evening out the highlighted areas there, because they were slightly distracting. So we zoom in and out, and then you can see exactly what we do. We're not changing too much within the model's face. So now that we've done that, let's go through the body, do the body, and then once we've done the body, we'll then move on to the next step within the retouching phase. So one of the good things about using frequency separation this way as well is that if you think you've gone too far, you can always come and adjust the actual opacity of both layers all in one, simply because they're already grouped into one layer. So what that's going to do is enable you to actually adjust and make an adjustment. So say if you've gone too far, that you can reduce the opacity to fine tune it a little bit more. So I'll bring it to about 90. Once I'm happy with that, I will then press Shift, Option, Command E. And what this does is create a stamp visible layer. Basically what this does is put everything that I've done on the previous layers below all into one layer on the top. So now even if I made a mistake on this particular layer, I can actually go back and redo the same thing using the layers that I've made before. So now that we've got a stamp visible layer, now what we're going to be doing is working on like adding a bit of punch and a little bit of contrast to the image before we take it back into Lightroom and do our final retouch. So what I'm going to do is select my subject using the subject selection tool in Photoshop, and then I'm going to select my curves adjustment layer, and I'm going to bring my shadows down a little, and I'm going to pop the middle. So basically what we're doing, we're creating a bit of an S curve. And as you can see, that adds a little bit of contrast back into the image and make our model pop a little bit more off the background. Again, I think that is slightly strong, so I'm going to bring that down to about, I say about 67 is good. Once I'm happy with that, I can come back to my model layer, reselect my subject again, but this time we're going to invert it. We're going to be selecting our background and making some adjustment to our background. So selection, invert selection, or you can press Command I to invert that layer. And then we're going to create a brightness adjustment layer. And that's just going to only adjust the brightness of background. So we're going to bring that down to about 20. A little bit of contrast into there as well, so probably about 8. So if we turn that layer on and off, you'll see what that does. Again, if we think we've gone too far, we can make a little adjustment to bring it down a tiny bit. I'll say about 70. That's perfect. Right, so our next step is we group these into a group so you can see what both of those doing, and then you can see how our model just absolutely pop off the background. If we put everything in a group and show you what we did from where we started. So this is the image as is now with all the adjustments. So if we turn everything off one by one, so you can actually see. So that was our base layer. That was where we did our skin correction, imperfection removal, etc. And then we did our frequency separation, smooth out some of the tones within the image. And then once we've done that, we're happy with that. We then move on to adding a bit of pop. So we added a little bit of pop to our actual subject. So if I turn it on and off, so you can actually see her stand out a little bit more, so there's a bit more contrast to the shots. And then secondly, we darken the background just a tad bit more, just to get her to pop up a little bit more. And that's it really, and that is our basic Photoshop done. And then once we're happy with that, we basically just flatten our image. So layers, flatten that image, we hit save, and that image comes back into Lightroom, and we will finish our image off in Lightroom. So now that we've got our image back into Lightroom, we're going to start making some adjustments. So first thing I'm going to do is make a few more minor adjustments in Lightroom. So this is where we're going to be finessing the image. I'm going to start by adjusting my temperature. So I'm going to bring that up to about 2 to 3, and then I'm going to lower my tint. I want to add a little bit more sort of that yellow greenish tone into the image. So about 10 would do. Perfect. So the next step is we're going to bring up our exposure a little bit more. So about 20 will do. And then we're going to add a bit more contrast to the image. I'm going to show you something how we're going to combat this in a minute, but as you can see, the image is looking really contrasty now. I'm going to drop our highlights down a little bit, probably about 9, 10, and then we are going to drop our shadows down to about -5. We're going to do the same thing with our whites. I'm going to drop that down a tiny bit, so probably about 8. And then we're going to lift our blacks. So this is just going to lift the face a little bit. So if we go to before and after, this is what we've got so far. I'm also going to be dropping the texture again a little bit. It's probably about, so this is going to soften the image a little bit more. Right, so the next step is to actually go into the actual masking tools available in Lightroom and create some masks. So we're going to start first by selecting our subject. So we're going to create a mask for our subject. I'm going to bring it down a little, add some contrast, add some shadows. So next mask I want to create is, I want to create a mask to just bring down the exposure on this part of the image a little bit. So we'll add a new mask, and this time we're going to use a gradient. So and we're going to go from top to bottom, and then we'll just reduce some of that so the focus goes more towards the actual face. We will fine tune the face a little bit more so you can actually see. So as you can see, a lot of the work we do in Lightroom, and we do minimal work in Photoshop, so you can do a lot just using Lightroom as your editing software. So yeah, so if you look at the before and after and what that does, just by adding that mask there, that just brings the overall exposure of that area down a little. So the next mask we're going to do is going to create another mask, and this time I'm going to select the background. I'm going to bring that up a tiny bit. I'm also going to reduce the temperature a little of that background. You can bring up the blacks a little of the background, and then maybe add a little bit of contrast back to add a little bit of punch. So the next mask we're going to do is we're going to create a radial mask. This time we're going to go over the face with this. With a nice soft edge radial mask, I'm going to brighten up a little bit and then reduce just a tiny bit of temperature in the face there, and just a tiny bit of blacks, and then reduce our shadows a little, and then bring our whites up a little, and that just helps our model's face pop a little bit more. Like I said, minor adjustments. Right, I'm going to come all the way down, and this is where I'm going to add a little bit of sharpening. So we'll come all the way down to our detail panel, and we're going to add a tiny bit of sharpening. But what we also wanted to do was add a bit of a sort of a film milk look with this particular shoot to the images. So I'm going to come all the way down to our effects panel, and I'm going to add some grain, and that's going to help us get closer to that filmic look. So we're going to add a little bit of grain, so about 35 would be great. Size, we'll keep it about 20, and roughness. So if we zoom in, so you can see the difference with and without the grain. So if we turn that on and off, that's without, and that's without. So you can actually see what that grain effect is doing. So now that I've looked at it, I want to bring up the exposure on the face a tiny bit more, so it stands out a little bit more, and that's it. We're pretty much done with this image. Pretty happy with that. So this is where we started, and this was our final image. And there you have it, guys. A simple editing workflow. Hope you guys enjoy this. If you do, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, and we'll catch you in the next one.